The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker, turning the neon reflections of the city into blurred, weeping watercolors on the asphalt. Detective Jack Mercer stood over the body in the alleyway behind the velvetroped entrance of the Obsidian Club, the water dripping from the brim of his fedora onto the pale, lifeless face of a young man named Julian Vane. Julian was an art student, a nobody with paint under his fingernails and a bullet hole in his chest. But the reason Jack was there, the reason the brass had called him in at 3 a.m, was because of what was found in Julian's pocket, a diamond cufflink bearing the crest of the Sterling family. The Sterlings owned half the city, including the gallery that was set to unveil a $50 million Vermeer the following night. Jack lit a cigarette, shielding the flame from the wind, the smoke curling into the damp air as he stared at the cufflink in the evidence bag. He knew this wasn't a mugging. It was a message, and it pointed directly to the penthouse of Victoria Sterling. Jack drove his unmarked sedan through the city, the tires humming against the wet pavement as he replayed the Sterling file in his mind. Victoria was the trophy wife of Marcus Sterling, a ruthless hedge fund manager who treated art like stock options and people like disposable assets. But Marcus was currently in Tokyo on business, leaving Victoria alone in the sprawling glass fortress overlooking the Puget Sound. When Jack arrived, the doorman buzzed him up without a word, the elevator ride smooth and silent, lifting him away from the dirty alleyway and into the rarefied air of the elite. The penthouse doors slid open to reveal a living room that cost more than Jack would earn in 10 lifetimes. And there she stood. Victoria Sterling was a vision in silk, wearing a midnight blue robe that clung to her silhouette like a second skin, holding a glass of scotch as she looked out at the storm-battered city. She didn't turn when he entered, her voice a smoky contralto that seemed to vibrate in Jack's chest. She asked if he had found him, and Jack realized she wasn't talking about her husband. She was talking about Julian. The air in the room shifted, thick with an unspoken tension that hit Jack harder than the scotch she offered him. He told her Julian was dead, watching her reflection in the glass window for a crack in the armor. Her hand tightened around the crystal tumbler, her knuckles turning white, but she didn't cry. Instead, she turned, her eyes a piercing emerald green, swimming with a mixture of grief and something dangerous, something that looked like guilt. She told Jack that Julian had been restoring a painting for her, a private commission, and that he had been afraid. As Jack pressed her for details, stepping closer, the scent of her perfume, jasmine and rain filled his senses. This wasn't just an interrogation, it was a dance. She moved toward him, the silk of her robe whispering against her skin, and admitted that the cufflink was hers, a gift she had given to Julian. She wasn't confessing to murder, she was confessing to an affair. The revelation hung between them, heavy and intoxicating. Jack knew he should arrest her or at least read her rights, but the way she looked at him, with a desperate vulnerability masked by steel, froze him in place. She touched his arm, her fingers cold, begging him to find the real killer before her husband returned, promising him that everything was not as it seemed. The investigation over the next few days dragged Jack into a labyrinth of high society secrets and underground art forgery. He discovered that Julian wasn't just restoring a painting, he was forging one. The Vermeer set to be unveiled was a fake, and Julian had been the artist behind the deception. Jack spent his days chasing leads in dusty antique shops and his nights returning to the Sterling penthouse, drawn back to Victoria like a moth to a blue flame. The professional line between them began to blur, eroded by shared scotches and long, heavy silences where the air crackled with electricity. One evening, as thunder shook the glass walls of her apartment, the tension finally snapped. Victoria confessed that Marcus was forcing her to sell the fake to cover his massive gambling debts, threatening to ruin her life if she refused. She was trapped, and Julian had been her only way out, a way to expose the fraud before he was silenced. As she spoke, her composure crumbled, and Jack, driven by a protective instinct that had long been dormant, pulled her into his arms. The kiss was sudden, fierce, a collision of desperation and desire that ignited the room. The crime scene photos and the looming threat of Marcus faded into the background as they tumbled onto the plush rug, the storm raging outside mirroring the storm inside. It was a violation of every protocol, a crossing of the Rubicon, but in the heat of her touch, Jack found a reason to care about the case beyond the badge. The morning after brought the cold light of reality. Jack woke up in her bed, the sheets tangled around his legs, Victoria tracing the scars on his chest with a gentle finger. But the softness of the moment was shattered by a phone call. Marcus was coming back early. He would be landing in 4 hours. The panic in Victoria's eyes was real. If Marcus found Jack there, or if he found out the forgery was still in the gallery, she was dead. Jack went into overdrive. He had 4 hours to prove Marcus killed Julian to cover up the fraud. He raced back to the precinct, ignoring the knowing looks of his partner, and dug into Marcus's financials. He found the link he needed, a wire transfer to a known hitman, timestamped 2 hours before Julian's death. But it wasn't enough to arrest him upon landing. He needed the physical evidence, the gun. Victoria had mentioned a safe in Marcus's private study at the gallery, a place she was forbidden to enter. Jack knew that's where the evidence would be. He met Victoria at the gallery an hour before Marcus's flight touched down. The gallery was dark, the shadows stretching long across the polished floors. They moved like thieves, Victoria's heels clicking softly as she led him to the study. Her hand shook as she punched in the code she had stolen from Marcus's phone months ago. The heavy door swung open. Inside, surrounded by shelves of priceless statues, was the safe. Jack cracked it, his skills from a misspent youth coming in handy. Inside lay a suppressed pistol and a stack of photos, pictures of Victoria and Julian, and recent ones of Victoria and Jack. Marcus had been watching them the whole time. A chill ran down Jack's spine. It was a setup. Suddenly, the lights in the gallery blazed on, blinding them. Slow clapping echoed from the doorway. Marcus Sterling stood there, flanked by 2 private security guards who looked more like mercenaries. He was a small man. But his presence was suffocating. He didn't look angry, he looked amused. He explained that he knew about the affair with Julian, just as he knew about the affair with Jack. He had ordered the hit on Julian not just to hide the forgery, but to punish Victoria. And now he had the perfect narrative, the disgraced detective and the adulterous wife, caught stealing from the gallery, a tragic murder-suicide waiting to happen. The mercenaries raised their weapons. Jack pushed Victoria behind a marble bust of a Roman emperor, drawing his service weapon as the first shots shattered the silence. The gallery turned into a chaotic kill box. Glass display cases exploded, sending shards flying like diamonds in the air. Jack fired blindly, taking down one guard with a shot to the shoulder, the noise deafening in the enclosed space. He grabbed Victoria's hand, and they sprinted toward the rear exit, weaving through the maze of sculptures. They were cornered in the restoration room, the smell of turpentine and oil paint pungent in the air. Marcus entered, holding the gun he had used to kill Julian, his eyes dead and cold. He aimed at Victoria, smiling. But Jack, running on adrenaline and rage, tackled Marcus. They crashed into a workbench, sending jars of pigment crashing to the floor, covering them in red and blue dust. The struggle was brutal, a primal fight for survival amidst the ruins of high art. The gun skittered across the floor. Marcus, younger and faster, landed a heavy blow to Jack's jaw, dazing him. Marcus scrambled for the gun, turning to fire. A single gunshot rang out, but it didn't come from Marcus. Marcus froze, a look of shock on his face before crumpling to the floor, a blooming red stain on his white shirt. Jack looked up, wiping blood from his lip. Victoria stood there, the smoking gun in her hand, her chest heaving. She hadn't missed. She dropped the weapon, her body trembling, and collapsed into Jack's arms. The sirens were already wailing in the distance, getting louder. The nightmare was over, or so it seemed. In the aftermath, the story was spun. Jack's testimony, combined with the evidence in the safe, painted Marcus as the villain who killed Julian and tried to kill his wife and a police officer. It was a clean close to a messy case, but the mystery wasn't quite finished. 2 weeks later, Jack stood on the balcony of his small apartment, looking at the same rain-soaked city. He had resigned from the force. The affair, though kept out of the official report, was enough to make him turn in his badge. He was packing to leave, to start over somewhere dry. A courier arrived with a package. No return address. Inside was a small, rolled-up canvas and a letter. Jack unrolled the canvas. It was the Vermeer, the real one. The letter was handwritten in elegant cursive. "Jack," it read, "you were the only honest thing in a world of fakes. Marcus didn't order the forgery, I did. Julian was brilliant, but he got greedy and threatened to tell Marcus I was stealing the assets to run away. Marcus killed him because he thought Julian was blackmailing him about the affair, not the art. I let you believe Marcus was behind the fraud because I needed a weapon to take him down. You were my weapon. I'm sorry. I loved you in the moments we had, but survival is a solitary art. Jack lowered the letter, a dry chuckle escaping his lips. She had played them all. She had forged the forgery narrative, manipulated Marcus into a jealous rage, and used Jack to eliminate the husband she couldn't divorce. She was gone now, likely in Europe, with $50 million worth of art rolled into a tube. He should have been angry. He should have called his old captain. But as he looked at the painting, capturing a moment of serene light amidst the darkness, he remembered the way she felt in his arms, the scent of jasmine and rain. He took his lighter, the flame dancing in the wind, and held it to the corner of the letter, watching the confession turn to ash. He rolled up the painting and placed it in his suitcase. Some mysteries weren't meant to be solved. They were meant to be experienced. Jack walked out into the rain, the city lights shimmering like a fresh coat of paint, a man with a broken heart and a fortune in his trunk, driving into the unknown.